Has released, all right, J Factor, New Jersey Firearms Owner Syndicate. The government has released its reply in the request for the TRO. And so, very, very interesting. One of the things that you've got to understand when you read that is that New Jersey is recycling the same old retreaded crap over and over and over for the last 50 plus years, okay? So, I brought this up in the Cheeseman case, and then if you go to Cheeseman 1927 in the Supreme Court dockets back in 2018, and then you scroll down to the CNJFO amicus brief, the CNJFO amicus brief explains this, and the footnotes are in it. But we need to go over here because one of the claims that New Jersey makes is that preventing the known and serious dangers of misuse and accidental use of handguns in public is the legislative intent behind the Bruen response bill, okay? And so, sounds legit, right? But it's completely not legit. It's actually a lie fabricated on top of another lie, fabricated on top of another lie, fabricated on top of another lie, fabricated really on a rope of sand, which is just a really crappy report that was written in 1968. And I'll explain everything to you, okay? So, if you read the Sicardi case, Sicardi is a test case in 1970. And what happens, Michael Sicardi is a theater owner from Plainfield, New Jersey, and he applies for his carry permit because Plainfield is starting to take the turn for the worse. And he has to carry the cash receipts from the movie theater to the bank, and he wants to have a carry permit. And then he gets denied for his carry permit. And so what has happened, and now, there's a little bit more to it than that. Sicardi applies actually in '68, and I think his initial permit is approved by the chief, and then they switch chiefs midstream, and when it goes to the court shoots him down, and so it ends up in county court, and then there's a huge case in the New Jersey appeals court. And then it goes to the Supreme Court. Most of the action from the Supreme Court had taken place in the appellate division. And so it's a test case. And so what happens in Sicardi is the government brings in the two Plainfield police chiefs, the chief and the previous chief, and then they bring in the Cranford police chief, who is completely hostile to the Second Amendment. We know that from everything else that's going on. So they bring in the Cranford police chief, they bring in the Westfield police chief, they bring in Chief Roy, the Elizabeth police chief, and then they bring in the Shrewsbury police chief, who's the head of the New Jersey Police Chiefs Association, and they also bring in Sergeant Klaus. Sergeant Klaus runs the firearms unit at the state police. So they bring in all these expert witnesses. And so the testimony of the expert witnesses is obviously coached up by the prosecutor because all of them say the same thing. Crime is very sudden, and it happens so suddenly that usually the bad guy will take the gun from the businessman and turn around and use the gun on the businessman, and therefore Sicardi having the gun would be more dangerous than if he didn't have the gun. If you read Sicardi, they talk about two things. So it's the National Commission on the Causes and Prevention of Violence report. That is a Franklin Zimmering report. And then they also talk about a law review, and the law review is firearms and policy in American life. Now, if you read the cover of Firearms and Violence in American Life, it's called A Staff Report to the National Commission on the Causes and Prevention of Violence, prepared by George D. Newton and Franklin E. Zimmering. Okay, so that's important because there's actually two reports. There's the staff report, which is Firearms and Policy in American Life, which is, let's say, the law review. And then there's the final report, and the final report is what this commission gave to Congress. They have two different library call numbers, but they're almost the exact same report. Now remember, this is 1968, so 1968, 1969, there isn't a drag and drop of a file. So the final report and the staff report are put together a little bit different, like the chapters aren't in sequence, but for the most part, they're exactly the same report. So when Sicardi says National Commission for the Causes and Prevention of Violence, they're talking about two different things, and you can actually read it if you're very careful in Sicardi. They say the final report, the staff report, but they're really the same thing, okay? And so what happens is on page 67 and 68 of this report has crime against small business in it. And in the report, it says basically this. Guns are dangerous. Businessmen aren't trained to use guns. And if they try to protect the business with a gun, crimes happen so suddenly that usually the bad guy steals the businessman's gun, turns it on the businessman, and uses it against him. Therefore, the businessman will be safer if he just didn't have a gun and he just gave the robber everything that he was asking for. That is what happens here, okay? Except this leaves a footnote. And so if you track the footnote down, it tells you where it came from. Now, this is Crimes Against Small Business. This is a United States Small Business Administration publication. So this is also 1968. Now, the beauty of this is a government document, and for like $11, you could get a brand new copy. And I think I bought 6 or 7 of them for my appeals court case. I never actually sent them in with the appendix, but this is it, okay? And then it says in here, the report on small business is made by a guy, and the guy's name is Vern Bunn, and Vern Bunn is a middle manager in the Kansas City regional office of the Small Business Association. And Vern Bunn is tasked with writing a report. Well, what does Vern Bunn's report say? In a nutshell, because it's super boring, it says, businessmen are not properly trained to defend themselves with firearms. And guns are dangerous, and usually what happens is the crime is so sudden that the bad guy comes in, suddenly steals the businessman's gun, uses it against him, and it would be better if the businessman, instead of fighting back, just gave the bad guy what he wanted and then remembered what the bad guy looked like and a list of the things that he took and gave that to the police. That's the Vern Bunn report. So what happens is, all of the police chief testimony in Sicardi is guns are dangerous, businessmen aren't trained, the bad guy takes the gun, turns it, because crimes happen so suddenly, on the businessman and uses it against him. And so at the last page of Sicardi, 552, page 552, the last page, it says, a permit to Sicardi wouldn't be of any value, as all the expert testimony stated would subject Sicardi to the misuse and accidental use of handguns in public. Okay? So that phrase, the misuse and accidental use of handguns in public, comes from the police chief testimony in Sicardi, and they got it from Zimring, and Zimring stole it from Vern Bunn, okay? So definitely not legislative intent. So right there, when the government tries to tell the court in the district court that this was the legislative intent of the Bruen response bill, they are full of crap. That is not how it happened, okay? More important thing to understand about that. This is American Opinion magazine. This is October 1968. A reporter calls all of the people involved in firearms and policy in American life and kind of asks them what the data was, how they arrived at their conclusions. And a lot of them were super tight-lipped because they really didn't have proper data in which to formulate their decisions. They actually had a theory in advance. They went out looking for data. There really isn't a lot of data on this. And so what they did is they took the actual data that they had and skewed it to make their theory at the end look like it had some kind of scientific research behind it. But they also, on this, within the pages, admitted, and this is actually written in Sicardi, that no data actually existed. They admitted that. It's written in Sicardi. It says no data exists. And yet they come up with this: guns are dangerous and will subject you to the misuse and accidental use of handguns. Okay, very important. So where does that take us? 10 years later, there's a law in Massachusetts called the I think it's Bartley-Fox. It's a gun control law, Bartley-Fox, and it doesn't work. And so they make this law, and crime gets worse. And the reporter in the New York Times interviews. Let me backtrack because I think this is important. Zimmering likes to talk. He's the other team's version of me. He's going to tell a story. And one of the stories that Zimmering tells when he's talking to the reporter, I think he told too much, was that the goal of this was the registration and subsequent taking of all the existing handguns off the street. And then they weren't going to issue any more handgun permits. And so handgun permits, the design was, now I'm talking about 2 C58-3A permits to purchase. Handgun permits were going to be based on what we now know from our bad law that was just overturned by Bruen. Handgun purchase permits were supposed to be, this is the recommendation here, based on justifiable need or urgent necessity or the Sicardi rule or whatever you want to call it, okay? And that's not just from Zimmering talking here, okay? He actually said it to the reporter, and it's in this. However, all you have to do is read Sicardi, because it says when they take the when they take the recommendation from Firearms and Policy in American Life, the recommendation is for the purchase of handguns. I think the wording is for those who wish to own a handgun. States should incorporate what constitutes a need by themselves. Think about how illegal that is, right? I mean, we tolerated the Sicardi rule with carry permits for 50 years, but could you imagine if they had come after purchase permits with the same justifiable need standard that they did? There would have been outrage. And there was outrage, and our gun control law barely passed in 1966. That's a video on its own, okay? But what we got to understand is that Zimmering's recommendations were registration and taking of all the existing handguns, and then justifiable need to purchase a handgun. Now, when we fast forward, okay, 10 years, Zimmering gets interviewed in this New York Times article about the Bartley-Fox bill, and nothing works. And Zimmering's talking to the reporter, and he says, criminologists are like gypsy fortune tellers. We're like economic forecasters. We can't say up or down what causes crime, what makes crime go up or what makes crime go down. And so that's kind of important, because New Jersey's whole basis for now the Bruen response law, or the Bruen response bill, it's a law, but let's call it the Bruen response bill, because it's never going to be a law after January 5th. The whole basis for preventing the known and serious misuse and accidental use of handguns. The whole basis for that was gypsy fortune telling. Zimring, the guy who wrote it, admitted he couldn't predict what was going to happen with crime. And remember, gun control, the way they sold it in Burton, is not about preventing the fit elements of society from owning or using handguns. It's about preventing criminals from using them. And so if they can't say, well, these laws are going to prevent criminals from using handguns, then there's no compelling government interest for the law. Okay, we're going to try to keep these quick. Just remember, the known and serious dangers of the misuse and accidental use of handguns was never legislative intent. It always came from the police chief testimony in Sicardi. The police chiefs got it from Zimring, right? And then Zimring got it from a middle manager at the Small Business Administration's Kansas City Regional Office, Vern Bunt. J Factor, New Jersey Firearms Owners Syndicate. I hope that helped explain.